We'll be beginning with our first session for the day, which is on sports broadcasting. This session is presented by Copyright Integrity International, which is the world leader in protecting sports-related rights. Getting straight to it, please join me in welcoming our panel for today, which will be discussing the ease of doing business and the future of sports broadcasting in India. Firstly, I'd like to invite Mr. Chintamani, who is an independent strategic marketing and media advisor. Mr. Rao has been a director of the Indian Broadcasting Foundation, a founding director of the News Broadcasters Association, and a founding director of BARC. Mr. Chaitanya Divan, Senior Vice President, Star India Private Limited. Dr. Lovely Dasgupta, Assistant Professor of Law at the NUJS. Mr. Nandan, Principal Lawyer, LawNK. And this session will be moderated by Mr. Boria Majumdar, sports journalist, academician, and author.
Good morning. Before I go to my panelists, Nandan actually has done half the job in his opening spiel, asking some very pertinent questions. Let me just try and take this a little deeper in the next couple of minutes and then set it up. In fact, in his opening spiel, he said, to quote, "The last 5 years have transformed the sports broadcasting realm." Maybe not 5, maybe about 2 decades. Couple of figures. When we talk about sports broadcast, inevitably, we talk about cricket. 1992, the BCCI balance sheet, and I have access to that BCCI balance sheet. Interestingly, it's in my archive and not with the BCCI. That tells you about sports governance in this country. The BCCI balance sheet showed a loss of 62 lakh rupees. A loss of 62 lakh rupees. Today, the IPL telecast rights are bought by Star for 5 years for 16,350 crores. In 1992, according to that case, which ended up on the, finally finished off on the 9th of February 1995, if I remember from memory, was adjudicated in 1994 on Diwali day at 1:30 a.m. in the morning in Justice Verma's house, which allowed ESPN Star at that point in time to broadcast the Hero Cup and subsequent series and all of that, resulted in a sense in the birth of the Prasar Bharati. At that point in time, Doordarshan wanted 5 lakh rupees from the BCCI to show cricket matches in India. You give me 5 lakhs, I will show the match. You don't give me, get out. Today, BCCI telecast rights based on that e-auction is sold for 6,000 plus crores. It is actually a story of 2 decades. 2 decades where India has become this gigantic, humongous, amazing superpower which dominates and has become the financial nerve center of the world. And social responsibility doesn't come with that. That's why we don't watch test match cricket. So that's a different story. But when we come to broadcast, when we actually talk in terms of broadcast, remember this, at that point in time in 1994, the Bombay Customs actually confiscated, Mumbai Customs confiscated ESPN Star, the broadcast equipment. They were not allowed to broadcast from Indian soil using that 1885 Act, the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. In 1994, we were resorting to an Indian Telegraph Act of 1885. So the story is fascinating and where it is headed, and no better. This is an absolutely brilliant panel to talk about all of this. I'll set it up. Opening comments from all of you. One. And just one comment. All of these people are known to me personally, so that makes it even more interesting. Nandan and I, we were in Oxford together between 1999 and 2003. We got the roads together, know each other for 2.5 decades. Lovely, in a sense, was my student. I've seen her evolve into an academic. So I know her for more than a decade. Mr. Rao and I were together at the Times Group about a decade back, and Chaitanya and I we work together doing a number of things for Star. So in that sense, I can take a few liberties of my panelists and promote them a little bit more. Okay. Opening spiel from all of you. Is sports broadcast over-regulated in this country? Mr. Rao, why don't you start?
Short answer, yes. When you talk about sport broadcast regulation, of course, my favorite theme is mandatory sharing, which is the subject of the next panel. I've been involved with this since 2005, when mandatory sharing first came into being. So I have lots of, shall we say, not only experience in this, but a lot of strong opinions about this. I have absolutely no doubt that there is part of this regulation, and I'm talking especially in the context of mandatory sharing and so-called public broadcasting.
Answer, absolutely yes. And I think modern technology has borne that out and actually exposed it to everyone. There are lots of threats, theoretical threats that are put up with respect to licensing regimes, national security threats. And to me, there is no less threat than sports to national security. I think sports enhances our society rather than has any risk to what we are doing as a nation. And to equate that with news broadcasting and have this elaborate set of uplinking, downlinking, registration, security clearance to broadcast a kabaddi match. I mean, and if you look at the way new technologies come in and not been regulated and not having any of the adverse effects. So in the previous world, we were unable to counter it because there's no count. How do you counter saying that this is over-regulation when we've never had a scene where there is no regulation? Right? So OTT shows us, and the way modern apps have broadcast sport, that there's nothing to be fearful for. And in fact, to me, new technology makes us open our eyes to how badly we've been treating traditional broadcasting, terrestrial broadcasting, all sorts of broadcasting.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It is definitely over-regulated. There was an interesting study done about 10 years back on what the impact of Star Plus was on society at large. This study was a global study, not funded by Star, but what it looked at was the kind of characters that Star Plus had in its shows, the kind of portrayal of strong women, empowerment of women, how they were changing the thinking within family units and at society at large. And these characters from the shows actually inspired a generation of Indian women across small town India to really believe in themselves and to start standing up for their own individual rights and eventually for family rights. Now, this is the kind of change that is possible through mass media. And I think that with the multiplicity of regulatory bodies that are overseeing broadcast and sports broadcast specifically, there is a lack of recognition or a lack of vision in terms of what is sports good at, what can sports really do for society at large. And that's where we are today, where clashing ideologies from different regulatory bodies have led to a very confused regulatory stance, from licenses to broadcast and uplink permissions, which just makes the growth of the sports industry extremely difficult. So yes, absolutely.
Lovely.
Hello everyone. I think it's regulated, but it's like a bull in a china shop. It's a regulation which is thoughtless, which doesn't really address the reasons for regulation. Not that I think that we should be promoting private broadcaster at all costs, but I think we need to have sound reasons as to why we have to have a policy where we are trying to, portray the stand of, let's say, the free-to-air public broadcaster vis-a-vis the paid private broadcaster. So where we really lack, and if you go through, even if the Sports Broadcasting Act of 2007, it's just a nonsensical piece of legislation without anything barring that. There has to be a profit sharing. You have to inform us when you go for this private broadcasting. I mean, where does lie the objective? What is the purpose? So using an ambiguous term like public interest really doesn't solve any of our questions. As viewers, we would also like to know, why should I watch a match on Doordarshan? So what is the point of this regulation? So it's not that you need to not have regulation, but what kind of regulation you need to have. That's important.
Excellent opening comments. I mean, we've got 35 minutes or so because we started a bit late. So what we'll do is I'll spend the next 15-20 minutes on 2 points. One which has been touched upon by Nandan and one which hasn't been. My panel title says, the future also. Use the word future of sports broadcasting. If you read multiple brand reports on the IPL, and in terms of sports broadcast, it starts like this, plateaus, and this goes up again. So basically, week number 2 to week number 6, 7 is a blur. Okay? So when Star, for example, acquired the rights last year, and I know this because I've had multiple discussions with them for research purposes, this was one challenge that they were trying to grapple with. What do we do? Now, according to me, the single most important instrument of class oppression in India is the language English. That's the single most instrument of class oppression. It alienates 90% of India. Is regional or going deeper into the small towns, 8 languages, 20 languages, the future of sports broadcast? Chaitanya, you start.
Yes, it is. It's definitely the future. I would expand it. The way we look at it is it's not only about language, but it's localization. What you had 15 years back in India was cricket, or 10 years back was cricket in an English accent, with a lot of terminology that probably the mass consumer viewer did not understand. What we've attempted to do in the last 5 years is localize that. Localization, step 1 is obviously language, but it's also having local experts. It is also having well-distributed broadcast channels, and then it is also about providing content which is local. It's not just about cricket in an Indian language, it's also about Indian content in Indian languages, which is where the entire business of leagues comes up. So localization is clearly the path where the sports broadcast industry will move. The sports industry will move. I see Kabaddi and the Indian Super League as fantastic examples of that localization as well.
Mr. Rao, what Star has done, 2 examples. One, and what the broadcast industry, including all of the major broadcasters, Star, Sony, whatever it is, they've not done. Take this year's IPL. Okay, when matches were moved out of Chennai, there was this Whistle Polo Express which left Chennai, went to Pune. These people were live 24 hours in their Tamil sports channel, according to ratings of number 2. In terms of overall ratings, that part of the country, they were going live for 24 hours from that Whistle Polo Express, taking advantage of that, what he talks about in terms of localization. So is that kind of content or content creation the future of the sports industry business? Second question to you, before I go to Lovely and Nandan, is if you actually see, he spoke about English language or certain lingo is being used for a particular consumer. Today, despite localization, we assume that this is the consumer base. Think in terms of the age group 5 and 15. Do you have commentary? No. Do you have localized commentary? No. Do you have, it's like I've got Agatha Christie, I've got Hercule Poirot, I've got Sherlock Holmes, but that middle period, there is nothing. So is there a void or is there a space for broadcasters to come in and say, oh, you know what, the ex-population of India between 5 and 15 remains my untapped base as far as sports broadcast is concerned, so let me go there.
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more with you about the Localization of content, yes. I mean, you can argue against that. I can't think of an argument against it. All I wish to say is that exactly is what, if we have something called a public broadcast or a so-called public service broadcaster, that is the public service they ought to render. What do they get the mandatory feed for? Sony or a Star bids $1 billion for rights for an event. You know what? They're not a public service. They're a business. We expect all media to work pro bono. No, that's ridiculous. They're in business. They bid $1 billion for rights. They got to make money on it. You are compelling them to give the feed to somebody. That somebody is meant to be there for public service. That somebody is it's on the ground that this is an event of national importance. That broadcaster, the public broadcaster, ought to perform exactly that role. Broadcast that game with commentary in 11 languages. What's stopping them?
So I'd like to see some positives. There's lots of things that are wrong with sports broadcasting regulation. The only thing I feel is a positive is that it's on the union list and not the state list, unlike sports. Imagine during this localization, and I'm not planting any ideas, please, no attempts at constitutional reform, but imagine Tamil channel having to go to the Tamil Nadu government to get approvals. It sounds far-fetched, but that's where sport regulation is. And looking at Small Mercies, one, it's nationally regulated, so there's some consistency and there's freedom to go and do things in different states. And secondly, the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports hasn't got involved in sports broadcasting. So I think two mercies which I will take positives, and they are not recommendations.
Address the 5 to 15 void also. Do you think if that's...
Right, sure. First thing, I think when we're talking about localization of content of sports broadcasting, one area that needs attention and a proper marketing would be our traditional sports. When you talk about localization, we do have region-wise sports which are not part of your mainstream. It's not mainstreamed in the way that you have an international federation, you have a national federation, but you do have a popular demand for those sports, like Gilli Danda. And I'm not being sarcastic here, but it's a fact. And when you're talking about promoting sports, and if you are talking about a public sector spirit to this, I think you need to think on those lines that I don't expect Star and all to do that pro bono act, but maybe the public sector broadcaster can actually market these content better and make an attempt to do it instead of just free riding on somebody else's hard work, and try to popularize local sports in a manner which will also be interesting to the kid in a village who actually is brought up playing that kind of a sport, or to a person in a city, because you are not talking about only the urban population. For them, this debate is nonsensical. They are all brought up on Premier League games and on English-speaking channels and all. But how many of the urban population would really be interested in a local sport like Jallikattu, which had this kind of a debate there? So if you are targeting that group, if you want to go for deeper invasion in our rural populace, as well as address that target group of 5 to 15, you need to think in terms of the games that kids grow up playing, and not only these high-end, urban and sophisticated games which are, giving really content to the private broadcaster. That's my view.
Okay, twice we've heard from two people about public service. I think even private broadcasters do public service, and otherwise I don't see why Star would broadcast a Khelo India. I don't think you guys make a single penny out of ISL. I don't think you make any money out of table tennis or wrestling or whatever. So there is an element of public service there. Having said that, I mean, the other question for all of you, Nandan alluded to this. Olympic Games 2020, Abhinav, if he comes back from retirement, is shooting. All I need to do is stand 10 feet there where he's sitting with my smartphone, record Abhinav's event, put it out on Facebook Live. IOC, which produced the feed, will not produce that because it's a qualifying round. So Indian consumer base is not getting to see Abhinav Bindra shoot from the IOC feed on the host broadcaster, which is Star, Sony X, whoever it is. But on smartphones from particular people, they are seeing Abhinav Bindra shoot live and qualify. You get trolled, you get abused, you get screwed. How do you deal with that as a broadcaster? How do you deal with the effect of smartphone new technology? Chaitanya first.
This is actually a real example. And we were speaking about this in the morning from the 2016 Rio Olympic Games, where the International Olympic Committee and their broadcast arm, OBS, was actually not producing some of the events, the qualifying rounds of certain events. And hence, as a result of that was that none of the broadcasters globally had those feeds. But consumers today are not just waiting for that professionally produced feed. They are getting score updates on various sports apps. They are following everything on the internet. So we actually faced a lot of consumer complaints saying, so and so Indian participant is, reached this qualifying round, and why are you not showing it? So this, yes, is a complex piece. I think the broadcasters will have to push federations and will have to go where technology is taking all of us. There is no option but to do that. I think that there is a particular solution we have which we take to consumers on linear television. We now have the same ability to do what technology helps us do using Hotstar. I think we have to use these digital platforms and use this technology to cater to that experience that the consumer wants. There is no option. I think we are, as federations, as sports industry, I think we are a step behind technology and a step behind consumers. We need to catch up.
Nandan, to you, before I ask the same question of Lovely, I mean, if OBS, the way Richard Pound has constructed OBS, is not broadcasting a particular event, okay? The host broadcaster has paid X billion. Now, it's not on air. It is not on air, so I'm not cutting into it. I put it out as a personal smartphone user, and a news channel cuts into it. Am I illegal? Is that news channel going to be sued by the host broadcaster for telecasting signal coming out of the field of play? Because it is sacred and sanctimonious. But because it's not on air, is the news channel committing an illegal act?
By broadcasting it live?
By broadcasting that smartphone thing live from a particular user, attributing it to that user, not claiming that, okay, this is our signal.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think I'd probably be responsible for taking down that stream as well. But I think we have to also be careful with moderating this. There's a business model that has been established for sports broadcasting. The most oft-used justification for piracy is that it's not available to me either free or it's not available to me at all. It's understood why that pushback is coming, but until we're able to find a new business model, be that some crowdsourced way of producing content and being compensated, we deal with the reality of a certain business model, and unless you're willing to support it, and if you're willing to dilute it in these very fundamental ways, this is a one-off you talk about, but one-offs, dribbles become rivers at some point of time. If you do not transition to a new business model, which I'm sure there is, we've always transitioned from one to the other, until you're able to establish that and get the various stakeholders playing in that garden, you do a lot of damage by sort of damaging the existing garden that you have. And we completely understand it's a part of Olympic history, and you possibly might have a chance to watch it non-live, and the broadcaster is going to show you that footage, which also leads to the point of why is there also entitlement to view it necessarily live at that moment, when broadcaster also is making certain choices and attempting to represent. It's not like the broadcaster says, I don't want to cover it. There's an operational issue why if 50 events going on at the same time, there's as much as the broadcaster can undertake. But the march of technology is not going to be regulated by law. It's going to be regulated by the smartphone companies and other things of what capabilities are. And also equally important, the point you raise is that is possible to do without getting a license for uplinking and downlinking. So you're not spending your days in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting filling forms once a week. Someone is doing it having bought a 25,000 rupee smartphone or even a 7,000 rupee smartphone.
Lovely. Is education also important? I mean, when I say education also important, Nandan alluded to the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, and I remember the first medal that India won in London. Okay, I don't want to name people. There's some, I don't know if Shada was there in London or not. I mean, there are journalists who were there at that point. They'll remember who I'm talking about. So India wins the medal. All of us are euphoric that India has won the medal. Our minister comes out straight in front of the venue, straight right here. So the venue is here, he comes out here, unfurls the tricolor and says, "Main yahan interview dunga." And every Indian journalist, having no rights whatsoever, opens his camera. And we go bang, live. Within 3-4 minutes, 3 or 4 IOC regulators come, everyone's badges are confiscated. Night, each of us get a mail saying, "You're done with." It's also a question of simple, basic understanding and education that unfortunately we still lack from our ministers, our politicians, and our bureaucrats.
Absolutely. That is, I think, precisely where sorry to use the word, the hypocrisy of Indian sports scenario is. Our politicians are, the first to jump into the bandwagon wherever there is a success, but unfortunately they are not there throughout to support the growth, the development, the success of our sports persons. That is the irony of our situation, which is quite different from any developed country, and that is where the developing of this developed country narrative needs to also be understood. The second thing is, on a larger issue of education, you possibly cannot educate the politicians. Otherwise, we would have been, have better politicians. But maybe yes, you can definitely attribute some sort of responsibility to the journalists as to who can be more sensitive to the occasion and give more preference to the glory of the athlete than the glory of the minister unfolding the
One second. You've been in this position. So there are 5 journalists standing there. 3 of them say, "I will not go live because I will follow regulation." Within 20 minutes, the editor-in-chief or whoever will say, "Screw you, your job is gone because you didn't come real time live and break," or whatever nonsense that is, and you're done with. So what does the journalist do at that point in time?
What a question. Absolutely. I mean, that journalist is in an incredibly unenviable position. Do and be damned, don't and be damned. I think let's just wind back a bit. The point is this, that these are things that are now developing. These are technologies are emerging, conflicts are emerging, issues are coming up. They have to be dealt with. The point is, I know London was 10 years ago. Okay? 6 years ago. London was 6 years ago. So yes, what's happened in the last 6 years about it? Nothing. I know. The point is, it should. All of these things, as they happen, have to be recognized. Somebody, I don't know which body, but someone has to pick these things up and make issues. Is it the IBF? Is it the NBA? Is it some sports body? Is it the IMB ministry? I have no idea. But these incidents have to be always seen in their proper light and signaling a change which has to be dealt with.
Mr. Rao, I'll follow-up question to you specifically. It will be another critical one. You've been, part of the NBA, etc. And here I make a distinction between news channels and sports broadcasters. Before every major event, we as news channels get a mail saying, "This is what the sports broadcast regulations are." So take the FIFA World Cup. So we get a mail, FIFA allows 90 seconds of footage per half hour. Okay? So we are told. And my colleagues tell me, we can only put out still pictures because we cannot put out the moving image. FIFA regulation. So we follow that. We follow that to the T. Some other network, whatever, there are 256 networks in India, somebody will say, "I will not follow this. I will follow NBA guidelines and I will show 5 minutes of footage." Okay? So then, 2 days later in an editorial meeting, we are told, "Oh, you know what? NBA guidelines, 5 minutes of footage, they are doing it, and why are you doing 90 seconds? You will not get BARC numbers." So basically, you are gone. You're done with. Now, interestingly, what is the solution to this? NBA guidelines, we so-called non-rights holders, we don't take accreditation to a particular event, so we are not bound by FIFA guidelines or BCCI guidelines or anything. So NBA is actually telling you, go cheat. Go cheat, screw FIFA. To hell with IOC. To hell with ICC. To hell with Star. So what, they have the rights, you do 5 minutes. How do you deal with such a situation?
Caveat, you might see this as a biased response because I saw it from the NBA side, okay? But back in the day, I led a negotiation on behalf of NBA. I led negotiation with the sports broadcasters on behalf of the NBA. I led the negotiation with the first IPL. I led the negotiation with Sony for news broadcasters' rights. Okay? We basically called in the sports broadcasters and said to them, collectively as a body, look folks, we're not in competition. Let's get that straight. Okay? On an average news day, and I'm citing numbers of back then, it must have changed now. On an average day, news channels in the country reach 44 million people. On an average non-match day, sports channels reach 7 million. On a match day, we reach 44 million again, you reach 12 million. So our numbers don't change, match or no match. So we are not taking away our audience as you think we are. Second, just consider this. That if you're watching a cricket match, would you rather watch it live on a sports channel or on a news channel? I mean, just think about it. By showing that something exciting is happening on the field at this moment, I'm telling my viewers they're in the wrong place, they should go there. Quick, switch to Star Sports because it's an exciting match. Isn't that what I'm telling them? So please understand that we're not taking your business away, we're helping your business.
I think that there is a role for news organizations to help grow following for sports. But the way consumers are following sports is changing. There are a lot of consumers who are only following test match scores, who are not necessarily watching live cricket, right? And as broadcasters, it is our job to entice them and bring them, make it attractive enough for them to come in and watch the live match. So we are always wary of other platforms enabling this different behavior of fans following sports scores but not watching. And hence there is always a balance of what we think is acceptable and not acceptable. Likewise, I think the sports federations, they earn a lot of their funding, which eventually goes to fund the sports and the athletes, comes from broadcast, from sports broadcasters. And if some of that is at risk, then I think the entire ecosystem of how sports broadcast works globally is at risk. So I think this is a bit of a short-term view to say that we are only showing 90 seconds or 5 minutes and the live match is somewhere else. We have to understand that the sports fans' behavior is changing, and we need to align our policies with that.
Boria, I must respond specifically to the issue of accreditation and news access, because we were actually at the center of a lot of this. I strongly believe that news channels are actually ill-advised to not seek accreditation at this point, because it really doesn't make a difference. 2012, clear case law from the Delhi High Court Division Bench in ICC versus NDTV on the parameters of what is fair use and what is not. So whether you sign up to FIFA, ICC guidelines, this is the law of the land, it's public law. So very, very clear, there's no benefit to not taking accreditation. You're actually denying yourself of some privilege, which anyway you're bound by public law. So that contract can only be as good as Indian public law in this. So if there are any news broadcasters here, I think there has to be a relook at that, because you're denying yourself on some principle which doesn't even exist. There's great clarity on what you can do and can't do now, even how many seconds. But more importantly, yes, I think there's a great recognition that news channels play a large role in promoting sport and discovery of sport and saying, go and check that out. But there's also lots of shifts and trends very different for, let's say, a football and a cricket. There's huge variation now in the role of the value of archival footage. After match, there's a football match where 2 goals are scored. 90 seconds is all you need for 99% of the residual value. And more importantly, it's not just the use of the content. Before 2012, when we actually monitor all of these news channels on behalf of sports broadcasters, and there's been a huge shift, which is a positive one, which was it was not about just viewership, but it was actually about commercial rights. People were doing package shows on news channels saying, watch the World Cup with us, sponsored by Aircel. And it's not just that the value of sponsorship was going to another place. It was actually a case for us of ambush marketing. Reliance Mobile was sponsoring the World Cup, while Aircel was sponsoring 30-minute shows on NDTV with 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes of footage. So there are clear variations on commercialization, but also a very clear line drawn in the courts on reporting versus analysis. Because fair use is the principle you're taking is the fair dealing as a news reporter, not creating a sports show or a package where 2 commentators are discussing, he played the stroke like this, or whatever, this is the enemy of the nation because they dropped some catch. No, nothing personal. But I think very clearly lines have been drawn, and people are extremely ill-advised to not seek accreditation. So I just like
Mr. Rao, and I have 5 more minutes before I open it up. Okay, yeah, he said he wants to respond to that.
Well, a couple of things. One is that, yes, Nandan, to your point, in fact, all of this is what has been very much part of our discussions with the sports broadcasters. And I remember very clearly that we talked about this business of creating packages, and that was wrong. The other very serious issue was about archival footage, because the IPR doesn't belong to the broadcaster, even yeah. And we're using footage from way back when, which doesn't belong to. So we are violating all that. So we went through all of that. The fundamental point was, forget the details. Fundamental point was that our relationship is symbiotic. We are not in competition. We are actually helping you. Let's work together and do this properly. Okay. Sorry, there's something I wanted to say, which I'm forgetting now.
Lovely.
I think there is no scope of any differences here, because of the reason that you have to understand that at the end of the day, it's the international federation and governing bodies like the international organizations like International Olympic Committee, the FIFA and all, who lay down the rule very clearly. And if they have laid it down, the broadcasters have to agree to that rule whether they like it or not. So whoever is down the line going to use that footage, they have to agree to those rules. So they cannot have their own set of norms, and howsoever unfair, dilemma, whatever dilemma they may be in their internal space, they have to understand that if the international organization wants, they can actually stop the person from broadcasting or using that footage, be it the archival one or be it the live one. So we have to toe their line, otherwise we have to change these international organizations, which is a tough task. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to Chaitanya's point about changing viewership, viewership behavior. Absolutely right, it's changing. Of course, it is changing. But just stop and consider. And we are talking in this context not about the digital media, about following scores on the digital media. We are talking about that one single TV set in the household. Okay. Question: what do you watch the match on? The sports channel or the news channel? If the prospect is going to prefer to watch the match or the clips of the match on the news channel rather than press the button and go to the sports channel, you have a serious problem with what you're doing.
You want to respond to that, or why? Roshan, till 10:30. Can I go till 10:30? Okay, 5 more minutes. One more point, and then I'll open it up for questions. Yeah.
You're right, but the news channels are currently available free, whereas sports channels are paid. So there's a bit of a difference there.
Let's take this post the session. Okay, this is specifically for you, Chaitanya, to start with, and then others can respond. I mean, this is again about the future of broadcast. Now, take the way this year's Indian Premier League was broadcast and marketed. The tagline was "Best ka Test." Okay. Now you have, and what was
Best
the
versus best.
best versus best ka test, whatever it was. Now, frankly, fair enough, whatever. I mean, the essence is that. Now, it works in a sense, and to decode that logic, and the logic has some merit. The logic was that look, take a Martin Guptill or a Jason Roy or these players. They might be number one in the world T20 rankings, but they are not able to make their franchise teams. So you are actually, this is the only platform, unlike the World Cup or whatever it is, where you are having the best pitted against the best. Done. Interesting. You also have the World Cup next year, starting in 7 days' time. Such a branding is counterproductive because you are actually doing the World Cup 7 days then, which is the World Cup. So do you go jingo? Do you sell India versus Pakistan, go take missile, kill them? How do you, as a broadcaster, strategize back-to-back 4 months of content when you've done this in 2018?
It's not very different across industries. If you think of parallels from FMCG, different brands from the same company will mean different things, potentially to different consumers, but sometimes to the same consumers as well. So it is about positioning different events in different ways so that the same yardstick is not used by viewers to compare the two events. So if IPL was best versus best, we'll have a fairly different positioning obviously for the World Cup, which is a different reason than to come in and watch the World Cup. It's as simple as that. It's simple marketing.
So would you want to use the IPL, for example? I mean, normal circumstances, a Kane Williamson would not be followed by an Indian consumer. But because of the IPL, a Kane Williamson would be a household name. So you're actually able to use a Kane Williamson story to build him up in a manner that a New Zealand match is also subsequently watched, which may not have been watched. So is that the future of sports broadcast, where a franchise league feeds into a global broadcast event?
Yes, interesting question. Absolutely. I think IPL has made a lot of global names familiar to Indian fans. So that is clearly an opportunity for us to grow viewership for the non-India matches as well. So yes.
Questions? Sir? Sir, microphone. To Justice Mudgal, here, front.
You talked about the 5-minute legal broadcast versus the legal 90-second barrier. As chairman of the Disciplinary Council of BARC, I would like to say no such complaint has come before us about the illegally acquired TRP. And if it does, it will be looked into.
Okay. Questions? There's one, yeah? There and there, yeah?
Yeah. Good morning to all the panelists and everybody here. My question relates to developments which have occurred over the past 24 months, which is that due to the advent of streaming platforms and not just large platforms like a Hotstar or others, there have been others through which a lot of people have realized that there is a market, a limited one, for small-scale sporting events. For example, a Kolhapur District Football Association, where or championship, or could be something in the Northeast, where viewership is often in the low thousands or maybe in the 10 to 20,000 range, which perception-wise one believes would not be sustainable for a large broadcaster like Star. So for these events, which always help in the development of the game, because they also often catch an NRI viewership, but the numbers are never that large, is there any separate model which commercially which a broadcaster may consider, and also legally whether there be any policy shifts required going forward? Thank you.
Globally, there are just two models. One is ad sponsorship driven, and the second is consumer subscription driven. There are only two models for media across the world. So it has to fit into one of these two models. I think it's an exciting development that every small local event can now be put on social media or digital media. But eventually there'll have to be some form of revenue coming through either advertising sponsorship or through subscription. Otherwise, some of these may not be sustainable.
Yes, sir?
Hi. Do you guys believe that broadcasters are kind of responsible for the overkill of sport, in the sense that when you sit strategizing for your tournaments, do you also go sometimes? Yeah, बहुत ज़्यादा cricket हो रहा है, बहुत ज़्यादा football हो रहा है.
Simple answer: don't watch.
No,
We don't actually
think we
stop
think
watching
that.
half of cricket.
I don't think we think that. I think that while total volume of cricket, for example, may be quite high, but the amount of relevant content is not necessarily that high, right? The cricket viewership comes on the back of the Indian national team. It comes on the back of Premier League, and that's about it, right? Indian Premier League. I think that content volume is still too low. There is scope for the volume and consumption to grow. Sports consumption as a percentage of total TV consumption is still not very high. It's in single digits.
Last question. Shanta. Microphone, please.
This is not technically a regulation question. It's I'm asking the person from Star Chaitanya. Questions for you. We understand how well localization and regional language television works. A lot of us find Hindi commentary far more interesting than English commentary when we are watching. Is there any quality control though? Because I'm hearing from my friends who understand Tamil that the Tamil commentary is awful. It is like beyond. It is not awful as much as it's sort of jokey, and that 5 to 15 audience is basically being fed like cartoon commentary. It's not really something that will help them understand the game, like it better, know it better. So they just find that fairly insulting as even sort of fairly young teenagers, 15, 16-year-old people. That was essentially the question I had about how do you quality control your audience in the sense of what is going out to them as an understanding of the game and an appreciation of the fun of it.
So if I just quote some numbers, everywhere we've launched regional language offerings, starting with Hindi, then we launched Tamil, and then on IPL we actually went out to 7 languages. We've seen a dramatic spurt in consumption, in viewership, where in each of those regions the language consumption is higher than the English consumption. So directionally we believe this is the right thing to do. Quality control is very important. Some of these are new commentators. They obviously may not have enough experience, but we have a lot of training sessions that happen before the event, during the event. Feedback is taken from social media.
I'll just interrupt you. Some of them are very big names. I don't want to take them in the audience on the mic.
Fair enough. It's different. I mean, playing cricket is different from commentating on cricket. So I think that training is still required, and I think this will evolve. The consumer has already shown that he or she loves what we're doing. I think the quality will evolve from here to a point where it will become very natural to consume sports in your mother tongue.
So just one more question is, in terms of again quality of broadcast, the ISL and the I-League quality is completely different than is broadcast by the same channel. It's completely different. ISL football looks fabulous, and in I-League it just looks Doordarshan,
Is there a question there, or is that just a comment?
Okay. I think he's left that ball outside the off stump because ISL they are a stakeholder, I-League they are not. So let's bluntly put that. Sorry. Too many questions, 10:31. My time is up. Says when there are more questions. My panelists have done a fabulous job on a positive note. Hands together for lovely Chaitanya, Nandan, and of course Chintamani. Thank you very much.
I now request Mr. Ranjit Rangarajan, CEO of Corporate Integrity International, to present the memento.